Oh boy, it's apple season. It's time for apple pies, fried apple pies, apple dumplings. But today, let's make a fresh apple cake. Jump on in and do it with me. Hi, I'm Mary Katherine, and welcome to my table. Oh, this is my husband's favorite time of year. He is so excited about anything I bake that's apple. They're his favorites. His birthday is in the fall when apple season comes in. So instead of a birthday cake, he usually gets something apple. Today is one of his favorites, though. It's a fresh apple cake, and it's really simple. It's another one of those recipes. You don't need any special equipment. You don't even need your mixer out for this one. And it's so delicious, and it's so moist. So let's make it today. Okay, we're going to start by mixing some of our dry ingredients. And we're going to use 3 cups of flour. And I'm going to measure this fairly easily by just using my finger to kind of level off the top. You don't have to be super exact with this cake because it's very forgiving, but we do want to not pack our flour in there, just kind of lightly set it in and then kind of level it off. So there's 2 cups and we need 1 more. 3 cups of flour, just like that. And then we're going to take some cinnamon. And for the cinnamon, we're going to use 2 teaspoons total, but I'm going to put about 1 teaspoon here in the flour. And like I said, this one's very forgiving, so I'm just going to measure the teaspoon in my hand. Oh, about that much probably is a teaspoon, maybe just a smidge more. Okay. So I'm going to put that in there. And then we also want to use some baking soda in this recipe, baking soda. And about a teaspoon again. So I'm just going to do the same thing and measure that in my hand. About a teaspoon. All right. And so before I get my whisk wet with the other ingredients, I'm just going to run it through this quickly just to make sure that cinnamon and the baking soda are mixed throughout the flour. That's good. Just real quick and easy. Now I'm going to set this to the side. And we're just going to leave it while we get some other things ready. So now I'm going to take this bowl, and to it, we're going to add our sugar and our eggs and our oil. I'm going to use 2 cups of just white sugar, granulated sugar. Okay, there's 1. I'm getting down in the bottom. I'm going to have to refill it. Okay, that's 2 cups. And then we need 1.5 cups of oil. And I don't have quite enough, so we're just going to finish it off with some butter. I'm going to melt some butter. I'll be right back. I've got enough butter melted to finish this off. So that'll be about 1.5 cups total of our oil and butter. And I think that'll be just fine. I've never done it before, but we're going to check it out. I think it'll work. So now I'm also going to add 3 eggs to this. All right. Okay, and so now we're going to take our whisk and just mix this together. Okay, we're almost there. All right, looks good. Now we're just going to set it aside. And now, get that little bit of flour off, we're going to get our apples cut and chopped for this. So we're going to use about 3 cups of apples, and we're going to chop them fairly small. So let me show you how I do that. I've got my apples already washed. I'm just going to kind of slice down 2 sides close to the core, and then come back and get that little piece on the other 2 sides like this. Okay. And then I do peel my apples for this. You probably could do it and just leave the peels on, but we like it where we peel it off. So I'm going to do that. Just get a quick run through. And if you leave a little bit on, it's okay. It's going to cook down in that cake and probably never know it. And these apples are so delicious. This is a Honeycrisp apple. This is what I'm using today in this cake. Now, you don't have to use this. You can use any kind you like. I've done it with lots of different kinds of apples over the time that I've been making this recipe, and it always turns out delicious. Another apple that works really well is Granny Smith. It's always a good cooking or baking apple. But every year when apples come in and are harvested, I've been getting these Honeycrisp apples for the last few years. I have a friend who has some family members that have an orchard up north with these Honeycrisp apples, and they always come down and sell them in my neck of the woods after they harvest them. So I always buy them in bulk, get half a bushel or a bushel, and then have lots of apples to eat on, to cook with, to bake with. And so that's why I've got plenty of Honeycrisp, and we're going to use them today. They will be delicious. And so I just go through and make thin slices, turn them the other direction and go back. And then this is kind of tall, so I may kind of run the knife through again, just a few different places to cut down the size of them again. But they do cook down very well in this cake, so they don't have to be teeny tiny pieces of apples. All right, let's get the last little bit. You know, I'm only going to need 2 apples. These apples were so big. That's going to give us 3 cups. And then sometimes, especially with these thinner pieces like this, you can kind of gather it all together. And then I can turn it on the side and do that cut down the middle, which is a little bit easier this way, but it's hard to do when the the slice is bigger. Okay, that should be plenty to finish off our 3 cups. Yep, there we go. All right, so now what we want to do, we're going to go back to our bowl where we have our sugar and our eggs and our oil, and then, of course, we had to finish out with a little bit of butter. And so we're going to add the dry ingredients to it, the flour and the cinnamon and the baking soda. And I'm going to do this just a little bit at a time. You don't have to, but to me, it's a little easier to mix it in if you don't do all of that flour mixture at once, because this is a thicker cake batter. You're going to see it as it gets closer to being together. And in fact, at this point, I usually switch from my whisk and go to a spoon, because it's just going to get too thick for the whisk. It's going to get trapped in there and stuck. So I'm going to switch to my spoon and finish adding this flour. And don't worry, even though it looks like it's very thick, it is working out just like it should. It's going to be perfect. Once we add those apples and a couple other ingredients, and once it cooks, just the moisture from those apples is going to give it the perfect consistency that you want for a fresh apple cake. So now we're going to add our apples. There's our 3 cups of apples. And then we're going to add about 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And I'm just going to kind of do a couple splashes to equal about 2 teaspoons. And then we also want to add 1 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to do that. Just kind of measuring my hand. And I'm going to kind of spread it out over the apples pretty well. And that salt helps to bring out those juices, and it's going to give just a lot of good balance to the flavor of the sweetness. And even though it still looks very thick, but you can even tell when you're stirring it at this point that those juices from the apples are starting to release and kind of changing the consistency of the cake batter just a little bit. And we've got those apples mixed in well. Let's take it over here. And I've got my bundt pan. And I'm going to spray it down with the baking spray. It's the one that has the flour in it. Want to be sure it gets up on all the sides. Okay. So I'm going to spray. And then we're going to add this batter. And it's so thick, I usually kind of just take it by spoonfuls and dump it in like this. Good. Until we get it all in, all around. I think I lost a little bit in that middle. Oh, no. Already smells good in here with those apples and with that cinnamon. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of spread it. That looks pretty good. Pretty even all around. The last thing that we're going to do before we pop this in the oven is we're going to take the rest of that cinnamon. Remember I said it takes 2 teaspoons. And we only put about 1 teaspoon in the cake. So we're just going to kind of sprinkle that other teaspoon across the top now. Just like that. And you don't have to measure it. Just sprinkle, a decent amount. Okay, and so now we're going to go in our oven at 325 for 1 hour. Oh, this cake looks good today. It did bake for exactly 1 hour. I checked it at 55 minutes, and it just wasn't quite finished, so I let it go those extra 5 minutes, and now we have it perfectly delicious smelling fresh apple cake. And I've let it sit for a few minutes just to cool before we take it out of the pan, but it's ready to come out now. So I'm going to do my cake plate, and this is how I do it. I just turn it upside down over the cake and then flip it over. I make sure I think it's centered, and voila, it comes out so easily. And that is a fresh apple cake. Now this one calls for a brown sugar glaze on it that is so yummy. And so let's make that now, and I'll show you how. So I've got 1/4 of a cup of butter in my pan, and I've started letting it melt. And to that, we're going to add 1 cup of brown sugar. This is a 1/2 cup. So I'm going to do it twice. Here you go. And then it calls for a 1/2 of a cup of 1/2 and 1/2. I don't have 1/2 and 1/2, but I do have heavy cream and milk. So what we're going to do is just put 1/2 of each, and that will make us some 1/2 and 1/2. I think this is fine. I'm going to give it a quick little shake. Finish filling it up. Just like that. And now we just want to cook this long enough that the sugar kind of dissolves in it. And you're just going to let it finish cooking down. And after it does, we'll go back and add just a little bit of powdered sugar. It doesn't have a lot of powdered sugar in this recipe. You don't want it like an icing. You really want it to stay like a glaze. But it is a glaze that kind of sets up as it cools. Okay, and this is going to happen quickly since I'll let that butter go ahead and start melting. But I'm going to give it just a little bit longer to make sure that our brown sugar is dissolved well. Okay, I think that's going to be pretty good. Feels like that sugar has dissolved well. You can kind of see the consistency of it. So I'm going to turn this heat off. Just pull my pan off of that heat as well. And so then we'll go back. I'm going to get me a little whisk that I'll use at this point while we add the powdered sugar. The recipe calls for 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. I always feel like it needs just a little bit more. So I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup. And that's all you will need in this recipe. Okay. Let's carefully whisk this in. Now you can sift this powdered sugar if you want to make sure that there aren't any lumps. But since this mixture is hot, it tends to help that powdered sugar dissolve pretty well, and just use some pretty vigorous whisk action. And you can get rid of any little lumps in the powdered sugar. So I don't usually sift it. I just kind of keep going until it's as smooth as I want it to be. See what that looks like now. Just one more quick, good whisk all the way around to be sure. You can let your cake cool all the way if you want. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to glaze it. And I do this kind of in stages because the glaze is still quite runny. I'll go ahead and put just a little bit on now, and then I'll let it set up a little bit more and go back later and put some on. And then another option that you can add on top of your cake is pecans. And I usually do that. And this is an option. You can also put the pecans in the cake if you like them in it. I typically just put them on top. And that way, if someone doesn't want the pecans, they can kind of eat the rest of the cake and just scrape them off the top. So I'm going to add just a little bit now. And this is a fairly generous serving of the glaze. And so that's why I kind of let it set up a little bit and go back later and add a little more. And it's going to run down in that middle pretty good too. So I'm going to stop at this point. And I'm going to take my pecans and go ahead and add them just all around like this. And then when you go back with a little more glaze, that just helps those pecans stay in place. In fact, I might go back now with just a touch. All right. And then as it cools more and sets up a little more, I'll go back with some more of that glaze. And you can always reserve some of it as well and then heat it up a little bit because it will set up. So heat it up a little bit before you serve it. And if anyone wants extra, you can just put it on each slice as people want. So anyway, but that is your fresh apple cake. And it is so delicious. And really, you saw how quick and easy it was to put together. The hardest part about it is chopping your apples. It probably takes longer to chop the apples than it does to put the cake together or to make this glaze. Really simple, really delicious. This is one of those recipes that you'll want to hang on to. We're going to kind of go through a series of some recipes that are good for holidays coming up. So over the next month or so, be watching for different videos that we come out with for side dishes or desserts that you may want to add to your holiday menu for Thanksgiving or for Christmas. And we love this one at Thanksgiving. You put an apple cake out as an option. Maybe you want a pumpkin pie or pecan pie or something like that. This just goes really well with all those good Thanksgiving flavors. So this is one of those that we have. I also have another older recipe. One of the first ones that I came out with when I started Mary Katherine's Table YouTube channel is the pineapple casserole, the baked pineapple casserole. And if you are newer to the channel and have not seen that one, you may want to go back and check it out. We'll put a link in here so that you can do that. That's another favorite of our families at all the holiday gatherings as well. So that's a great side option. This is a great dessert option. And like I said, over the next month, we'll come out with a few more options that you may want to check out in case you're wanting some new things at your holiday table this year. So that's our fresh apple cake. Thanks so much for joining me today at Mary Katherine's Table. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe, share our channel with your friends, all of that stuff. And remember to go out today and find someone who needs a little bit of kindness and give them some of yours.